Hi everyone, David Lindstedt here, and welcome to Risk Awareness Week 2022, which is a one-day charity event. So make sure that you contribute and donate to the charity of your choice that will benefit the people of the Ukraine. So, as I said in the overview to this presentation, it's going to be a little bit odd. And one of the ways it's going to be a little bit odd is I am just going to pull up here this is an incognito Google Chrome, and I am going to put in a search for resilience. And there it is, resilience. Let's look at images. Because I want to talk about what we think about resilience, how we view resilience, and in a minute I'll talk also about the costs of resilience. I think there's two main influences of the way that we envision and think about resilience. And one comes from individual resilience, from personal resilience. And when you just do a resilience, this is the kind of thing that you get. You get the one person pushing the boulder up the hill. You get the one person who's trying to stop the bad thing from happening to them. You get a person by themselves who has dug in and is sort of taking on the world. Here we go again. It's making things possible, pushing up boulders. You can do it, stopping bad things. It really is sort of a one person who is beleaguered and attacked by the fate of the world. There's a few as you start scrolling down that involve more people, and I think that's quite wise. But for now, mostly is a single person in their individual life, and I think this is where we get a lot of our images, and I'm going to come back to this image in a minute. But now let's search for organizational resilience. Very good. What are the images there? Well, here's a bunch of models and words and things, so that's kind of interesting because there aren't any sort of ready images here. Our friends at the I-Corps have one model, and our friends in New Zealand have another model. Let's look at one of these real quick. So this is I-Corps. Let's pull this up. Okay, so what do we have for organizational resilience? Oh, well, it's all the pieces of what we sometimes think of resilience, such as business continuity, crisis communications, ITDR, risk management, supply chain, legal audit, information security, and the like. Now let me switch over here to my actual presentation. So this presentation is the specter of resilience. I struggled with a number of different titles. I think there's images of resilience. I think there's a specter of resilience because I think particularly after COVID, most organizations are saying, yes, I want more organizational resilience. That's a good thing. I was thinking about calling it this title that rolls right off the tongue, why organizational resilience is too complex, countercultural, and costly for you, even though you think you want it. I chose not to go with that. I'm David Lindstedt, and I'm going to be talking about organizational resilience and these images, these ideas we have of resilience, and how, quite frankly, I think they're all wrong. So we talked about these common images of resilience, and I think this is one that typically pops to mind. This is the image of resilience we should have if we're using the flower growing metaphor. What we see in resilience, in true stories of resilience, not just surviving, but thriving, adapting to challenges, adapting to changes in the environment, adapting to the new reality of a situation that is very complex and ambiguous in a VUCA world. I started researching resilience a few years ago, and based on the case studies, first of all, there's very little research. There are incredibly few books on the topic of organizational resilience. There's a few articles. There's a few things out there. So based on anecdotes and interviews and case studies, this is the sort of the result of what I've learned about resilience. And all this is in a forthcoming book. It should be coming out this summer through Routledge Press. We're in this strange position where we all think, rightly or wrongly, and that's an interesting question, that we need to have organizational resilience in our organizations. We need to build it in here. And yet, it's quite unclear what it is. And I think, again, we have these images of it's either like grit and stick-to-itness and determination, and we get that from the individual psychological resilience. That's seems to be wrong with regard to organizational resilience. And in fact, it is the stick-to-itness, stubborn determination that often gets organizations into real trouble in the first place, and particularly in complex, post-disaster, unpredictable situations. It turns out that doing the same thing, the way that we've always done it, leads to problems when the environment and the situation changes. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a problem. You would just do the thing and everything would be fine, and then you wouldn't have a post-disaster or a complex situation where you had to adapt. So then the other idea that we have, and this is the one I used to have. Well, I had both of them, actually. But the other idea was, all right, resilience is a combination of all the preparedness disciplines. So it's ITDR and cybersecurity and enterprise risk management and crisis management and business continuity. That also seems to not be correct. In the research, in the reviews, in the case studies, in the anecdotes, in the conversations, in the interviews I've had, very, very few of them involve anything like these preparedness entities. And I'll talk really about that in a minute. But what that means is we're in a very unenviable position of not knowing what the heck it is that resilience is. What does it mean to build organizational resilience? And so we're using a scattershot approach. We're throwing money and resources and investments at trying to be resilient, and we don't really know what it is, because the research hasn't really been there yet. Again, with my book, I will, and in this presentation, I'll try and frame it up a little bit to make it a little bit more clear. In doing the research, I found 14 items, competencies, factors, you can call it whatever you want, that come up time and time again in stories of resilience. And I'm going to go through these briefly, and only briefly, because really what I want to talk about are what is it, if this is right, what does this mean for organizational resilience? And I think what it's going to mean is it is way more complex and countercultural and costly than you probably thought it was. And that should give us some pause about how we want to invest in resilience, how we want to build resilience in our organizations, because we're going to have to do it carefully, or we're going to come up with some problems on one side or the other. In short, if we try and throw everything at resilience, well, of course, we're wasting a lot of money. If we do all of these things in all of these factors for across the organization, we're going to destroy the status quo that to some extent we need. But if we do none of it, the status quo stays, and it is not going to be sufficient to deal with change. So let me go through. For these 14, they're not the end-all be-all of resilience. It's not a taxonomy for all time of what resilience is. We could slice and dice these different ways. These are the 14, and I tried to categorize them into 4 overall categories. These are the 14 that come up again and again in the stories, the case studies, the anecdotes, the narratives, the research in resilience. So let me go through them relatively briefly here. The first category we have, and I put this out as the first one because it, I think, is the most obvious and recognizable, and if you thought about it long enough, as far as organizations go, and changes in the environment, changes in the marketplace, in the customer base, disruptive technology, mergers, acquisitions, all the things that can significantly disrupt an organization, well, it helps to have money. So there's actually at least 3 types of capital, and this is sort of how I categorize it. But first of all, yeah, resource capital. Research from 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, Christchurch earthquakes, and other particularly prolonged disasters, but even the research from the economic downturn of 2006 to 2008 have shown quite clearly that it helps to have money. It helps to be able to bring money and to solve problems. It's not quite so simple as that, however, and now we start to see some of the counterculturalism, the anti-establishment, the iconoclast thinking that is required. Because in a post-disaster environment, in a changed environment, in a situation that is complex and unknown and uncertain, not only do you need money, you need to invest and spend more money than your competitors, and you need to be able to take money and reorganize it across the organization. You need to take money from places that are not performing well, that are old technology, that are old processes, procedures that fit in the old world that may have been even yesterday, and apply them now. So, for example, in COVID, right, we saw a number of organizations that changed their investment strategy, changed their market strategy, pivoted into new areas of technologies and services and products, The example I like to use is healthcare for the homeless in Baltimore, Maryland. They got additional money from donors. They spent that money on telehealth and had fantastic results in being able to offer telehealth without people having to come into their facilities, which was the model until that point. You need relationship capital. Hey, it helps to have friends. It helps to have vendors that trust you and that you trust. It helps to have long-standing partnerships. It helps to have these relationships inside and outside of the organization, and it helps to have information. You've got your strong and weak tie networks. Information is potentially priceless and costs money to obtain, as do relationships. All of these take time, they take resources, they take investment, they take conscious decision, they take a thoughtful setting up of the organization to make sure that employees can interact with other people across all of their networks inside and outside of the organization to build these things. All right, it's very quick. I think you understand, and you probably have an intuitive grasp of that. So let's switch over to something you probably don't think about. One of the things that became clear in the research is resilient organizations make use of what I termed crews. They're not teams, they're not groups, they're not departments. They don't have a committee. They don't have rules of conduct. They don't have an overall written documented mission statement. They don't go within the set hierarchy of the organization. Crews come together to solve problems. They come together from different parts of the organization. They don't pay attention to hierarchical lines. They're self-organizing. They're self-directing. So as we saw in COVID, in Christchurch, in Katrina, in Fukushima, in the particularly prolonged and pronounced disasters and crises, and again, this doesn't have to be external. This could be what happens from a new merger and acquisition, from the adoption of new disruptive technology. Again, the pace of change in a VUCA world is only increasing. So one of the things that resilient organizations do is they set up, or it happens organically, crews. Now crews, and we have some different types, and I want to add red teams here too. Hold on, we'll do this right now. I'll go back. See, I can make mistakes and experiment in real time. Okay. These crews have to be iconoclastic. They have to be countercultural. They have to be dissidents, because they have to find new ways of operating, of investing, of offering products. They have to find new ways, new services. They have to reinvent at least portions of the organization. And to do that, you're going to piss people off. You have to be very careful about this. This is not easy stuff. But in order for the status quo to stay alive, parts of the status quo have to change. In a complex, wicked problem situation, we're not going to be able to think through the answers sitting by ourselves in a room. What we have to do is form crews that come from different backgrounds, different ways of thinking, that can be innovative and experimental and creative, and can run little experiments and test ideas and make inexpensive measurements to figure out what the reality of the situation is. In the early days of COVID, we often forget. In the early days of COVID, in the first days or weeks of Katrina, in the ongoing aftermath of the Christchurch earthquakes, it wasn't clear what was going on. It wasn't clear what things would work and what things wouldn't. It wasn't clear what customers wanted or what the marketplace would do, what the narrative was. Can we offer alcohol as a takeout? We never could before. That was illegal. Oh, now it's okay. In the court systems, particularly, I've done my interviews in the court systems of Wisconsin. In the court systems of Wisconsin, you couldn't have hearings via Zoom, but then you could. So these new ways of operating, these new ways of finding ways to continue the primary goal of the organization, and that can even itself is going to be a little bit dicey, because you may have to get out of your current lines of business and get into a new business in order to be able to survive and thrive. But let's go back then to our image. The image, how many times will I have to click back to get here? Yeah. This is not the image of resilience. The lone person who's by themselves, through grit and determination, stick-to-itness is moving through and handling the disaster. This is the image of resilience. It's thriving. It's experimenting, coming up with new lines and new businesses. It's the ability to be able to pivot and change to take advantage of the or the environment, the situation, the new normal, the what's going on. And this is going to happen faster and faster as we have more, again, disruptive technology, disruptive practices, changes in the environment. This has to be our picture. But what that means is, in terms of capital, we're going to have to allow our employees to network across different kinds of lines, to participate in volunteer organizations, to participate in things outside of work, to change capital around, to keep some capital available. These are going to be different things. And crews are going to be very challenging. Crews have to challenge the status quo. They have to think differently. They have to find new ways of operating. And that may mean killing existing lines of business, killing existing departments. You might have to have like a murder board that's set up where you're tracking things that are not producing as well as they could, and get rid of them and to move into something else. And you may have to do this very quickly. So it's going to take contrarians. It's going to take red teaming. It will involve the entrepreneurial, finding new businesses, marketplaces, customers, and entrepreneurial, finding new services, products, delivery, and ways of working. A culture of experimentation. This means trying new things. And quite frankly, a lot of us human beings, we human beings, don't like to try new things, because once we found something that works, we try and stick with it. Most of what we do in the course of a week is a matter of a clear environment, a matter of habits. And now we get into atomic habits and level up your life and these other types of books and models that look, most of what we do in any given day is very clear. It's obvious. I like to be comfortable. I like life to be predictable. Well, that's not how you get to thrive in a changed and changing VUCA world. Now, in a post-disaster situation, in a time of great change and complexity, think of COVID, that's a nice easy example because we've all lived through it. We have to try different experiments. What does that mean? It means that in complex situations, we do not know the problem itself, let alone do we know the solutions. We don't know what's going on because it is unpredictable right now. If it was predictable, we'd already have the solutions and the status quo would continue to work. It doesn't. Something has changed. The environment, the situation, the conditions have become very different. And that means that we have to figure out what the heck's going on. Who was it? Hold on. Yeah, the Kay and King book on, what's it called? Radical Uncertainty. The Kay and King book on radical uncertainty makes this very clear in talking about we need to find out what's going on here. And this isn't a matter of probability. This isn't a matter of statistics. This is actually more a matter of narratives and figuring out, look, what's the reality of this situation here? And the way that we do that is to have simple, subtle, inexpensive, parallel experiments to see what works. So again, during COVID, the first few months of COVID, what will people buy? What can we offer? Where can we go? What can we wear? How will it work? What will be open? What will not be open? What will be available to us? What will the supply chain look like? What will the imports from China be like? Where can we park our containers? These huge, complex questions that did not have clear answers, and the answers that we had in February and March looked different than April, May, and June. And we had to try and take these experiments to figure out what was going on and then what would work. We have to be able to fail. We have to have a safe to fail culture. Now look, in most organizations, in most of the clear and complicated domains of everyday work, of widget generation and answering emails and going to meetings and dealing with customers, most of it is pretty understandable. It's pretty predictable. And if you go outside of the guardrails, the guide rails, the status quo, the standard way we do things around here, you'll probably get a slap on the wrist. That's called deviation, and we don't like deviation. But in facing a complex, wicked problem, you have to. You've got to try different things. And what the key is to be able to fail and be able to learn, right? Failing just to fail is useless, but failing because we ran an experiment and we learned from it one way or the other, that's valuable. And we need dissimilar individuals. We have got to have a group of people who think differently, different backgrounds, different experiences, different brain setups, bringing different perspectives to the situation to try and figure out what is going to work. And all that takes what I call exponential leadership. So I use the word exponential leadership because I want to call out a certain type of leadership. Resilient leadership, it doesn't sound quite right. There's a zillion books on leadership. I want to try and pull out what are the traits of a leader that make them particularly good in a complex situation, in a significant disruption, at a time of great uncertainty. And what comes to the surface time and time again are these 5 components. I'm just going to go through them really quickly. So situational is understanding I need to have different ways of leading depending on the situation. And what works in the clear domain doesn't work in the complicated domain, doesn't work in the complex domain. In the complex domain, where we find wicked problems, great uncertainty, post-disaster situations and crises, well, in that situation, I have to be a lot more empowering. And that is one of the things that we've seen. If employees are not empowered, and now this may mean crews, this may mean some employees, not all employees, it might mean a good number of employees, but employees that are facing these wicked problems, employees that are facing these difficulties, these challenges. Think about your thought leaders, and think about the kinds of wicked problems that most of your higher level folks need to do on a daily basis. But nonetheless, in the post-disaster situation, it's quite clear that the people have to be empowered both to make decisions and take action without direct instruction. They've got to be able to be innovative and creative. They have to do it within guardrails, within some guiding principles, some commander's intent, a direction of operation, but they've got to be able to be creative, they've got to be able to think differently, and now we go back to they've got to be able to try different things. It has to be safe to fail. They have to come up with dissimilar. Why? Because they're working in crews, they're coming up with different ideas about the external environment, the internal environment, they're contrarian, they're going against the status quo, and they've got the relationship capital, they have trusted people, they're getting information from their strong and weak tie networks, and they're given the resources that it's going to take to be able to pivot, to make changes. When the experiments tell us one way of doing business, of operating, they need to be able to take advantage of those results. So the leadership has to empower them. And what we have seen now with the Great Resignation should not be a surprise to us. Perhaps, certainly because of the unpredictable nature of, well, the world, we couldn't have said exactly how this was going to go. But research from the Christchurch earthquakes is quite clear that at any time during a significant and prolonged crisis or post-disaster situation, about 50% of people are actively thinking about leaving the job. So recently, Starbucks has unionized, at least in one location. Why is this? Is it about money? No, this is not what they're arguing for. And this isn't a matter of a few more dollars an hour. This isn't a matter of providing more breaks or better coffee or free treats on Hawaiian Fridays. This is a matter of listening to your employees. This is a matter of care. And what we're seeing as bottom line dollars and cents, as Machiavellian as you want to make this, if you don't care for your employees, they're not going to help. They're going to leave. They are not going to be motivated. And part of that is with the purpose. And part of that is being loss aware. Leaders have got to understand what the crisis has done to people, what the situation, what the last 2 years of COVID how has that impacted. And what the Starbucks workers, for example, are saying, rightly or wrongly, probably rightly, is that they weren't listened to. They were frontline workers to some extent during COVID. There were things that they suggested that would have been better protection, better business practices, better ideas for the way that they could operate. And what they're saying is they weren't listened to. They weren't paid attention to. Their leaders were not aware of the losses that they were suffering. The leadership in these situations in a resilient organization has got to understand change means loss, right? And so now let's go all the way back. I'm just going to hit this again at our ideas of what it means to be resilient, right? Change means loss. It means that something that I had, my coworkers, the time that I had lunch, the ways that I operated, working from home, working here, doing this, the responsibilities, the roles and responsibilities I had, they're going to have loss. This is where we want to get to. But every beginning begins with an ending. And we have got to be able to recognize those endings, call them out, name them, and to do so with a sense of purpose. It's loss, hopefully not for no reason, but loss so because of these types of things and for a new type of change. And that may not be easy. It's going to be costly. So think about everything that we've learned so far. Now, what I want to do is put this last bit of information in your brains, because for me, this really changed the way that I thought about organizational resilience. And what Taleb says is that there is a difference between fragile, robust, and anti-fragile, what we would call resilient, organizations. Most organizations, processes, functions, services, operations, whatever have you, sorry, most of them are fragile. What does that mean? It means they don't like change. They're hurt by change. They're not flexible. They're not adaptable. Being on the manufacturing line, producing widgets, balancing the checkbooks, accounts receivable, accounts payable, steam generation, hotel management, most of the things that we do, the way I answer email, the way that I make a phone call, the way that I reserve a room to have a meeting, the way that we conduct ourselves during these meetings. These are all very fragile because they don't change and they stay the same, and we don't like it when they change. Now, here's what's important. Because of those things, very human, all too human, organizations and individuals, but organizations put entities in place to make that more robust. What is robust? It means absorbing mistakes and getting back to the way things were. So most of the items that we think of, maybe, in resilience, in organizational resilience, like cybersecurity, business continuity, ITDR, cybersecurity, enterprise risk management. Most of these are in place to bring the organization back to the way things were. It absorbs mistakes. But at some point, the change will outstrip these entities' ability to bounce back, to return to normal, to get back to the status quo. And if you don't have the anti-fragile components, if you don't have the resilient capabilities in place at your organization, you're in real trouble. Because anti-fragile organizations and entities like change. They benefit from change. They leverage the mistakes. And so anti-fragile practices are the things that allow the organization to pivot in the face of great uncertainty, in the face of disaster, in the face of dramatic change, in the face of great unpredictability. These cannot be prescribed practices. There are no playbooks. There's no set of instructions for how we're going to deal with the next crises, the next big uncertainty, the biggest impact and change in the world. Right now, we have the Ukrainian crisis. What happens if Russia invades Poland? What happens if China makes a move? What happens if nuclear weapons are used? We don't have a playbook for this. Now, we have things we can do. That's a whole nother lecture. But the idea is we need to be building these resilient capabilities. But they're not going to look like business continuity, cybersecurity, emergency management. They're going to look like agile, like lean, like motivation 3.0 with Daniel Pink, like growth mindset. We're starting to see some culmination of practices that are set and created specifically for a VUCA world, for a world of great complexity, of wicked problems, of changes. But these teams, and I use teams, they're going to be more crews, but these capabilities are going to be such, I'm going to skip that. Yeah, I'm going to skip that. These capabilities are such that they're going to be costly in terms of both investments and training and resources and changing the culture of the organization, hiring leaders that are caring and are willing to talk about, well, soft skills. So let's look at some of these conflicts. The status quo prides efficiency and predictability and standard operating procedures. They have robust entities such as risk management and cybersecurity and business continuity, so that if it has a shock to the system, it can absorb that shock and get back to the status quo. But significant events, significant disruptions, disruptive technology, mergers, acquisitions, war, all the things that happen are going to require innovation. They're going to require creativity. They're going to require change and loss. And the more resilient organizations are going to be able to accept and somehow welcome that loss, that change, that disruption. Innovative, resilient organizations and crews are exploratory and experimental. They like complex and chaotic environments. They don't use standard operating procedures. They use heuristics, rules of thumb, improvisation. They make mistakes to be able to learn from them, and they don't go on hierarchical lines. They're self-organizing. They're self-determining. Yes, these things were successful in the past, and if you continue to do these successful things in the way that you've always done them, you are going to fail, and fail dramatically. You have to be able to pivot, to change, to think differently, to be innovative and creative in times of great disruption. The cost of building a resilient organization is going to be different, I think, than what we normally think of it. I think we have thought about resilient individuals. There's nothing in the research that says groups of resilient individuals are more or less important than any other kind of individual in a resilient organization. That's not what matters. What matters are crews of individuals that are operating in a culture that allows for experimentation, innovation, and mistakes, that are supported by leaders that empower and listen and care for these employees and all of the employees and offer a purpose. They bring people together around a purpose. They understand as much as possible the nature of the disruption, of the loss, of the change, and they are able to shape those people around them to be able to empower them and provide the guiding principles and the commander's intent. And all of this takes capital. It takes information capital. It takes relationship capital. And it takes regular capital. It takes resources. It takes money. And it takes spending more money in times of great uncertainty. But doing so wisely by moving money around, making efficiencies in one part to be able to spend more money in another. All of this is terribly disruptive and absolutely required. The organization is going to have to change. That involves loss. That involves doing things differently. It involves taking money and people away from managers who are trying to cling on to them because that's what matters. This is a VUCA unpredictable world, and we cannot script out our approaches. There's no business continuity set of directions that's going to help us deal with the next COVID, with the next war, with the pace of change in our world. What matters are building these capabilities so that parts of the organization can take advantage of the change, of the disruption, and thrive on it, and be able to lead the organization through that time of great uncertainty and complexity. We're near our 45-minute mark, so let me try and provide a few last thoughts as we wrap up today. I think there's the recognition by leadership, executives, many of us, that organizations are going to have to be more resilient. They're going to have to be more agile, more flexible. They're going to have to be willing to pivot and change. They're going to have to accept the losses that are just part of business as usual, that are going to occur in faster and faster iterations in an increasingly VUCA world. I think we learned a lot during COVID. I think one of the things that executives, leadership, many of us in the preparedness and risk industry learned was that just having the robust entities does not make an organization resilient. And in fact, if I'm right about many of the things that I've just talked about, these robust entities actually make us more fragile, because these entities are set up with the express purpose of bringing things, by and large, back to the way they were. But what we saw from COVID, what we saw from Christchurch, what we see from Katrina, what we see from any long-term duration disaster, crisis, disruption particularly, but the short ones as well, the more acute ones as well, is that the robust entities only bring us back to the way things were. But doing things the way things were is what made the crisis in the first place. If times change, the environment changes, the situation changes, and we're still doing the same things we've always done in the way that we've always done them, then we're going to be in big trouble. And in fact, this is what most of us try and do, and this is a real danger here with thinking of resilience as the same as being robust. Because most of these entities are going to try and get things just back to the way they were. And they're going to try and rely on the old habits, the old practices. And that is the opposite of what needs to happen. That is successful in a clear and complicated domain, but as you move into the domains of the complex, of the chaotic, those are the opposite of what you need to do. Complex situations require experimentation. They require a probe, sense, respond set of actions. And so the anti-fragile pieces of the organization are increasingly important. So this means that agile and lean and growth mindset and these other practices, DevOps, that are starting to come into these organizations, these pieces and parts are going to be very, very important, and having the leader, having the leadership and the culture, and be able to support these entities moving forward. So let's go back very quickly. Okay, yes, that's good. These are what we should be investing in if we want to be resilient, not risk management, but we have to have that as well. Let's be quite clear. The status quo is there for a reason. And so are the robust entities that help us absorb shock and get back to the status quo, and our efficiencies. These are needed, but they can't be the sum total of our organization and the way that it works. We have to have an investment, a very conscientious investment of these other elements as well. We have to have the right kinds of capitals. We have to allow our employees to have relations outside of the organization. In fact, we want that. We want them to spend time outside of the organization. We want us to have money investing in new things. We need to have information that comes from all sorts of different areas that we can rely on when times are changing. We need to have crews that we can spin up quickly, that we can change around, that can be self-directed. These are going to be people who are dissenters, are iconoclasts, are thinking differently, are creative and innovative, and they've got to be focused on a goal. Leadership has to provide the purpose for what they're doing and why they're doing it. They have to care. They have to empower these crews and other people throughout the organization to experiment, to make mistakes, to think in dissimilar ways. All of this is an entirely different way, by and large, of thinking about resilience and investing in resilience. So to conclude, and remember, my title way back up here was The Specter of Resilience. The specter of resilience, I think, is this notion that organizations need to be more resilient, which they do, and bringing in these ideas of either grit and determination and stick-to-itness, or of these robust entities of crisis management, enterprise resilience, and et cetera, et cetera. But the reality here is we better think more clearly about this, because investing in robust entities will only make us more fragile. And we've got to invest in these other elements of resilience. And that is going to be a lot more difficult, I think, than we thought it was. It's going to be complex. It's going to involve a delicate balance. It's going to involve money, and it's going to involve investing in new things in new ways that we're not used to. So I hope this was very helpful. I hope, if nothing else, that got you thinking about what the devil is organizational resilience? How might it work? And I ask you to keep a lookout for my book. The book is slated to be out this summer through Reutledge Publishing Company. Thank you again for your time. I hope it was of interest, got you thinking about some interesting things. If you would like to reach out for training or consulting, or just to get some more ideas, feel free to do so. And remember, this is a charity event, so be sure to donate to help the people of the Ukraine. Thank you all very much. Have a good day.